Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Scale with Predictable Success. That's the podcast in which we get to talk with people who either by themselves and or with other people are achieving predictable success in their career and in life. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have with us someone who's become a close colleague and friend, as you're going to hear over the last couple of years. And that's Jenni Catron, who's the founder and CEO of Foresight Group. Jenni,
That's right.
welcome.
Thanks so much, Les. I'm excited for this conversation. We're always working and talking all things predictable success, but getting to have this conversation is going to be fun.
Yeah, it did occur to me just as I was firing Zoom up for this that if we had just stuck a microphone in on any one of the last half dozen conversations that we've had,
That's right.
on a bus ride or whatever it's been, that we would make a great podcast episode in its own right, because we, as listeners are going to discover, we've got a lot of shared interests. So in that regard, kick off, just tell all the listeners about Foresight Group. What is it?
Sure.
Why did you start it? What does it do?
Yeah, I started the Foresight Group a little over 5 years ago. And we focus on helping develop healthy leaders and thriving teams. So I have a real bias towards, first, I want a leader to be healthy and thriving. And there's lots of history that we could get into of why that is so significant. And then the dynamic of team, I'm just really compelled by teams working effectively together to achieve a mission. And so Foresight comes along, executive leaders, either via one-on-one coaching or executive team coaching, using much of the predictable success model to help us kind of unpack all of that. And I think, we leaders, especially founding leaders, have such a desire to achieve the mission that they started out with. And oftentimes they find themselves stuck by their own limitations as a leader or the complexities of the team dynamic as the organization is growing. And so that's really my heart and passion, is helping equip leaders in that space. So that's where we started. I kind of stumbled into it. I had worked in the corporate world and then the nonprofit world and the church space. And the thread through all of that was this passion for healthy leaders and thriving teams. And eventually, as I was writing and speaking and getting opportunities for those things, it just kind of morphed into, I think it's time to do this myself. And I think there's a little bit of that entrepreneurial founding leader spirit in me that felt like I had to do it myself. So here we are.
And when did you do that? When did you step out and fund Foresight?
It was just about 5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, cool. When you talk about having that sort of impetus within you, did any of that come from your family background? Did you grow up in a sort of a business environment? Were you sort of in and around and saw that, or was that just something that grew as you grew older?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I reflect on my family history, there definitely were entrepreneurs in our family. So my grandfather, who's 90 years old and still as spry as anything, like he's a fascinating human to talk to. He grew up in the inner city of Chicago. And he had a grocery store, like a little corner grocery store in Chicago, that he and my grandmother ran for a number of years until their kids were like, my mom and my aunt were middle school age. They moved to northern Wisconsin. But so my grandfather had several businesses. And then my parents dabbled in some businesses. They weren't very successful with it. So I will say this, growing up, I didn't see very successful entrepreneurial efforts. But clearly it's in the blood. It's in there somewhere.
A lot of effort with not just the sort of success that it should have returned. So
Right.
tell us a little bit then about that corporate career that you mentioned. So you come out of college, what do you go do? Just track your path there and
Sure.
take us up and through to the point where you're starting to think, I think I should do my own thing.
Yeah. I as a little girl, I wanted to work in the music business in Nashville, Tennessee. So I had big dreams at a pretty young age. I think I was about 13 when I said, I want to work for a record company in Nashville. And that was the goal.
Right.
And so that's what I set out to do. I went to college in Tennessee. I got a job at a record label in Nashville. And I didn't even know what I would really do there. I just knew that that's what I wanted to be a part of. And so I got a job at a company called Forefront Records, which was a division of EMI Music Group at the time. And started out as an intern in the radio department and then became an assistant in the sales and marketing department. and was on a pretty fast trajectory there. Within a handful of years, I was a director of artist development. And so I was working with when the A&R department would finish a record and finish the actual musical product, then it came to me to help oversee from video to sales and marketing to just all the nuances, the radio singles and all the pieces that went into the puzzle. It was my job to help kind of orchestrate all of that. Wow. And it's just a fascinating job, but also required, I quickly discovered how my leadership skills were lacking, because you had to be able to align a team that weren't direct reports of yours. They were peers throughout the organization who you had to get kind of aligned with your vision for the artist you were representing. So I did that for about 9 years. Fascinating job, amazing experiences. And then I kind of took a crazy pivot. We went through a corporate merger that was a pretty radical shift in like culture and leadership. And so the organization shifted quite a bit. And simultaneously, I got an opportunity to go on staff at the church that my husband and I had been a part of. And it was a pretty fast growing church in the Nashville area. And they were looking for somebody who would be what the title was executive director. And wow. Essentially the person who would run the day-to-day like leadership, staff, operations of the church. And so kind of a crazy pivot for me career-wise, but stepped into that role. And that church grew from, we were about 5 staff when I started to about 75 staff. Wow. 12 years later. 500 attendees to over 6,000 attendees, 1 location to 6 locations. So just a rocket ride of growth. Wow. That I would say was really, I mean, both experiences were kind of incubators to my growth, but that crazy growth trajectory was really formative for me. Right. From there, and that opportunity, so I was a female in leadership inside of the church space, which is a little unusual in a lot of environments. And that opened doors for me to start talking about leadership and speaking and writing. And so I got opportunities to write some books, especially in the church space, was speaking at conferences in the church space. So that began to kind of just reconnect with, as a little girl, I'd always wanted to write a book, but I kind of killed that dream pretty early on, because you just kind of think that's an impossible dream. And so here it kind of gets reawakened. And that's really what began to open me up to, I have this passion for helping leaders and teams really be effective. And here are these additional opportunities for that to take place. And so that began the rumblings of, should I do that more full time? Should I be, I'm doing it kind of as my side hustle, but is that the thing that I should be doing? And that passion just continued to grow until I finally took the leap.
And was that a difficult, torturous process? Did you anguish over it? Or did you just, waking up, was it like cold turkey, waking up one day and say, okay, I'm doing that on Monday morning?
Yeah, no, it was totally arduous. Like I'm wrestling through, can I do this? All the insecurities, all the fears, right. And I'm just by nature an achiever. And so the idea of, if I can't completely mitigate for failure, then can be afraid to take the step. And honestly, Les, the thing that really kind of launched me into saying, okay, I'm going to start this, was I had since moved on to another organization that just wasn't a good fit. So I had been at the church in Nashville. I ended up going out and serving at another church in California, and it wasn't a good fit for me. Wonderful people, great organization, but just culturally wasn't a great fit for me. And I was really just not thriving myself. And so that discomfort eventually pushed me to go, okay, I've been thinking about this for a handful of years. I'm doing now's the time to do it. Yeah.
And you'll have heard me say this a number of times, when a founder is in that phase, all your friends and family sort of look at you and they say, you're being very brave. This is a very brave decision. And what they mean is you're crazy, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
You do have the added element, I'll call it that, or a factor that you've already mentioned, which is it's relatively unusual for a female to be taking leadership positions. I don't mean it doesn't happen at all, but it's for-profits have their challenges in that regard too. But did actually putting your shingle on the wall as an external consultant and being a female and doing it in the church space, did that give you pause to think at all? And has it impacted how you show up in terms of your marketing?
Sure. Yeah, a great question. And it really did. I did when I started out and launched Foresight, I anticipated I couldn't just stay in the church space because I felt there would be a lid there, that there, and I give lots of space for all the reasons why that occurs, whether I agree fully or not. But I anticipated, what I'm going to need to not just stay in the church space. I'm going to need to consider opening, stepping back into the nonprofit space was really a friendly space for me to step back into, more nonprofits. And then back into the corporate space, which I kind of reignited a love for the business environment. And so it's been a mix of all of those, over the past 5 years. But yeah, in the church world, there was some hesitation of, and if you look at some of the organizations that I would consider peers, or the organizations I aspire to be a peer with that are consultants in the church space,
right,
I'm one of maybe a couple females that lead a consulting organization that works in the church space. And so yeah, it has its nuances. I've been in many ways pleasantly surprised by the places I have been invited into. Right. And so yeah, it just comes with some complexity that you have to figure out how to walk through and overcome the insecurities or doubts or fears that sometimes, every leader wrestles with. It doesn't matter. There's always something we fill in the gap with.
I'd like to come back in a minute or two and tease out a little bit about the difference in working in let's call it a faith and cause-based world and the for-profit world, because you're one of the few people that, and I include myself in that, who actually straddles those worlds. And it is a fascinating observation for me, the commonalities and the distinctions. So I want to come back to that in a moment or two. But before we do that, you're 5 years in. That's a nice, it's not a round number at all, but it's one of those sort of half important numbers with a zero on. So you're 5 years in. When you look back now at what you thought you were getting yourself into, how is it most different from what you thought that you were stepping into? What would you say to your five-year-old younger person? By the way, something you don't know is this is going to happen, or you're going to have to deal with this, or it's going to be like this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some ways it's funny because the entire reason I called my organization Foresight is I've always been one who anticipates and tries to really project what's coming. I joke that I never did an all-nighter in college because I got the syllabus and I planned out my work. I'm just kind of a geeky kid like that. And but funny enough, I think I didn't know what to anticipate even when I started Foresight. So it was like this, I just kind of took the leap and figured I would figure it out as I went. I think that there was some naivete in assuming that I would eventually hit a milestone where it felt comfortable. Right. And I haven't found that yet. I don't know if some of that is just my wiring. You can coach me on this, Les. I don't know if some of that is just my wiring or if that's just the nature of, founder leader, in that, there's always another hurdle. And again, some of that is my ambition, because I joke, we hosted a conference this past year, a digital conference, and initially I had a goal of I wanted 3,500 attendees to register for this conference. Right. So we hit the 3,500 goal. So now I'm like, well, can we hit 4,000? Oh, we hit 4,000. Can we hit, and so sure. I have to really temper that. There's, again, lots of good coaching there in that visionary side of things, but recognizing I can just be exhausting to myself and my team. So I do think there's a little bit of probably going back to, that 5 year, younger version of myself starting this, of just enjoying the stage that you're in and not trying to so ambitiously move on to the next, because the next just comes with more complexity.
Right. Yeah, and we have talked about that in the past, and one of the things that I shared with you is, and you just, I think, said it yourself, so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. So in our world, as you know, we talk about the early struggle phase, and everybody knows that's going to be problematic, and you have to be a complete idiot to launch a new business and not know that you're going to have some problems. Right. And then you do the right things. You're one of the 20%. You get it to the first stage of growth, second stage, which of course in our world we call fun. And I have on many occasions spoken with folks. My good friend David Allen is probably the greatest example. I mean, here's a guy's biggest seller wrote Getting Things Done, biggest seller of productivity books, had a magnificent consulting company. And I remember standing with him and his wife, Catherine, who worked in the business with him. And we'd just done a full diagnostic process with him and his team. And he said, they'd all agreed that they were in whitewater. And I remember David saying to me, here's the thing, I don't remember one day of fun.
Yes, I can relate to that. Yes.
And I just stood there for a moment or two and waited a bit. And he looked at me and he says, I think that says more about me, though, doesn't it? Yeah, just yeah. And there are other folks that I had one client 2 weeks ago who convinced that they were going through whitewater, and we spent a full day together, just down in the National Harbor Hotel down in DC here, and it was obvious just an hour into it, and I shared with him, "You're not in whitewater at all. You're in fun, but you're just huge overachievers, so you're all constantly unhappy."
Yes,
yes. Right. If you're a perfectionist, then fun never gets to be fun, because there's always something could be better, right?
There's always something else. There's more, like, so that is sincerely like a struggle for me, because you have told me, we've talked about where Foresight is right now, and I there have been times I'm convinced we're in whitewater, and you're like, no, you're not there yet. Like and when I pause, and it's so funny because I've spent the better part of the last handful of years studying predictable success and like trying to learn and obviously facilitating it, but sometimes even diagnosing yourself, I'm convinced, I'm like, oh, and then of course I'm trying to anticipate and avoid whitewater, which is not possible. So I think there have been times where I've been trying to like mitigate for the anticipation of that stage, and you just squeeze the fun out of it.
Right.
So
and you put your finger on that. You do not want to bleed the fun out of fun. It's okay to not be the sort of person who's always happy Aunt Sally, but you do want to take some time and celebrate the successes that you brought.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. By the way, I just not just for you and our conversation here, listeners in general, one of the ways that I have been able to help folks who are maybe puzzling about that. I mean, am I genuinely in whitewater and having these massive growth problems, or am I just constantly dissatisfied with how things are, and that's the way it is? One of the things I share with folks is, you'll know you're in whitewater because some of the things that are happening will either actually cause, or you will be fearful that they will cause, reputational risk. If you're not experiencing that, if you're just teed off or frustrated or disappointed, or you made a couple of mistakes, that's not whitewater. Whitewater has got a magnitude that it either already has, or you're fearful that it's close to causing reputational risk, that you're just going to drop the ball.
That's a good distinction.
That you're going to start losing clients or whatever that might be.
Yeah, that's a helpful distinction. That's good.
So I want to come back just to this crossover between the faith-based, cause-based world and the for-profit world, and I want to ask you about something that I've been struggling is not the right word, but I've been sort of investing some time in. I don't typically read business books or listen to business podcasts or anything like that, and mainly because I work at it all day and I don't want to listen to it all day.
That's right.
But also, I happen to know that I become a plagiarist very easily without knowing that that's what I'm doing. And I read out something that's a really good idea, it sort of pops up 3 weeks later, and I've convinced myself I've come up with it.
Yes. Yeah.
But one of the most impactful, as it turned out, podcasts about leadership. I don't think it's set out to do this. Maybe it did. That I've listened to this year is about the rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Mars Hill, yeah.
which for our leaders in its most simplistic terms is a real life story about the collapse of a church in the Seattle area because of failures in leadership. There's a lot more going on there, but that's essentially what it is. And one of the things that I've been dwelling on is I know that world quite well, both from personal experience in a previous life where I helped found and was an elder in a fast growing megachurch. And also because, like you, a large number of my clients are in that world. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find it easy to do in the for-profit world is to come in and challenge a dysfunctional culture. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's almost always a high element of what we do. Now, it may be dysfunctional for, quotes, ethically neutral reasons. Right. We haven't got this right, so it's dysfunctional. Or it may be dysfunctional because people are doing, questionable things from a behavioral standpoint. Do you find it harder to challenge dysfunction in the church world because of all of the undercurrents of, we're good people, we love each other, and also there's the get out of jail free card, God told me to do it?
Yes. It is interesting, and I have, I've had the privilege of working with some phenomenal leaders in the church space. And then I've also just seen some really unhealthy dynamics in leadership in that space as well. But I do think there's a little bit of, because the church is such a people-oriented organization, there's an assumption we're good at leadership, people management, culture, etc. And oftentimes I find churches to be some of the most toxic work cultures. Now, that's a bit of a, I'm not using data for that statement. That's a perception statement. But yeah, I think sometimes in the church world, we can have a tendency to assume it's all good, and we haven't really developed some good practices and good just organizational behaviors in how we operate. And there is a little bit of that. There's a tension that exists because in the church world, that lead pastor or senior pastor, whatever the title might be, has that calling, that anointing from God to be the leader of that organization, that sometimes doesn't allow for the same measure of accountability and feedback that I think is typically more prevalent in the corporate world. You can have exceptions to any of that, but yes, it quite surprised me going from a corporate environment and then into the church world full time. I found myself quite surprised by how some of the things that were more of the behavioral norms of how we operated and treated one another inside of the organization that I was a part of. Now, caveat to that is that, I started at that company, at the record company, when I was 20 as an intern. And it was my first real work experience. And what I didn't know is that I was in a really fantastic organization with great, culture and staff training and so forth. So I kind of got a really good experience right out of the gate. But I was quite surprised going into the church space how much of those skills were way underdeveloped, and it wasn't as much of a concern. So yeah, it's a unique thing to what I'd be curious to hear more of what you experience there, Les, as you're working in both sides.
What I've having worked, as you say, on both sides for a long time, one of the things that I feel most contributes. Now, I've got to put all the caveats in that you did. There are many, many fantastically well-led churches, incredibly healthy, and I've been very privileged to work with many of them, and we've had a number of precisely those types of leaders here on the podcast, with Jason Mitchell on from LCBC a while back, who's just literally in the last week, I think, taken on the baton from David there. Just wonderful folks, great team, very good, so forth. But where it has been problematic, first of all, it gets more problematic than it does in the for-profit world for reasons of transparency. And I don't think we have time to go into all of that, but you can if you're not a quoted company, if you're privately owned or family owned for-profit, you can hide an awful lot of dysfunctional behaviors or quotes get away with them. But the other thing is that I've come to believe that the lack of succession planning and bench strength development is a major contributor to it. And the reason is this: something happens which is exactly the same as in the for-profit world, and which is good for the early stages. You plant the church and you're struggling through early struggle to get traction. You're trying to get up to 100, you're trying to get up to 250. You get past 250, you get into fun. At that point, in both for-profit and not-for-profit, there may be a team that's called the management team or leadership or senior pastor, whatever it may be. But they're not really leaders, they're enablers. They're there in a good sense of the word, right? They're there to enable the vision of the lead pastor. And the same thing happens in for-profit. There's a visionary founder, and until you get close to whitewater and through it, any group that's called a leadership group is essentially a group of enablers. They're water carriers.
That's good.
Has the vision, and everybody else is there to help.
Yep.
Churches are terribly bad at making the necessary shift away from that to true leadership groups, where people are genuinely leaders, where they're being developed as leaders, and where they have a strong challenge function. And people are being challenged on some of the precepts of what they're doing. And so that it rolls into the whole area of succession planning, where if you're not actively looking, I mean, so many churches, it's just literally, if you'll forgive me, it's just the son is going to be, or one of the kids.
Yep.
And that's about as far as it goes, and that doesn't bring the light and air and transparency that happens whenever you're developing a succession plan. So that may seem very separate, but I think lack of bench strength and succession feeds into these, let's just call them poor quality cultures. And would help a lot with it.
Yeah, that's really well said. I completely agree with that.
Let's just shift over for a minute to the for-profit world, and then we'll take a little look at where maybe you think Foresight is going to be in 5 years from now when we talk to you on the podcast. Sure. So you, just so the folks know, it was a couple of years ago now, you became a licensed predictable success practitioner, a scale architect.
Yeah.
Just share a little bit of, where did predictable success hove into view for you? How did you get to know about it? Why did you think it would be useful for you? And how are you incorporating it at the moment in your practice?
Yeah, great questions. And I'm trying to remember where I stumbled on the book initially. So I stumbled on the predictable success book somewhere in one of the church roles that I was serving. I think just trying to study and diagnose, what are the challenges we're navigating. And then our mutual friend, Casey Graham, introduced me to predictable success. He's given that book to everybody, I think.
Yeah, I think. Yes.
So he kind of resurfaced it for me right around the time that I was launching Foresight. And, so again, I kind of deep dived into it again. But what I think what I found so helpful is, again, it's such a complete tool that is just endless. The more that I dig into it as a scale architect, the more that I'm like, there are just so many layers of this model that you have built that are just phenomenal. Like it's just endless of the resources and the tools that you can take to help leaders and their teams. But what I loved so much about it, and the way that I use it inside of Foresight, is that when I engage with an organization, because that leading edge is the coaching of the executive leader or the culture dynamics of the team, I still come first with what we call the diagnostic session in predictable success, in coming in with hey, let's take a look at, where is your organization in the life cycle? We need understanding and visibility of what's going on with the organization in this season. Right. And then my interpretation of it is then what's required from us as a leader. And that's where we use the VOPS profile to understand, okay, now what is required of the leader? And that's where it becomes so fun for me. And I think has always been what's resonated so deeply with me, is that at different stages, the organization needs something a bit different from the leader and the leadership team. Right. And so that, I feel like, just helps illuminate, where are the challenges, where are the problems, Why are we feeling stuck or unable to move through whitewater or wherever we may be? And so that's how we use it inside of Foresight. And it's just so incredibly powerful. And oftentimes when I'm working with an executive team, we start there, and then, the 13 imperatives, lie within that as part of the framework for the model. And we just start digging in, and it just continues to build on and help those leaders get greater awareness of what do we need to be focused on, what do we need to grow. And so it's core to how we were, the leading edge for us is that leader feeling stuck or them feeling frustrated by team dynamics. And yet we come in with predictable success, and it just illuminates, okay, where do we begin? What do we need to focus on first?
Yeah, it's just lovely hearing that. And I was just sharing with you before we hit record on the podcast. I'm literally just like 45 minutes ago back from being just outside of Nashville, actually, with a client that, if I use their name, most of the folks that are listening would know them, and they work in an area not adjacent to what we do. They help other organizations get aligned and so forth. And to spend a day with their leadership team and to have them say the things that I've got the privilege to hear over and over again, starting with, seriously, do you have a webcam in our offices? Seriously, have you been watching the last year and a half play out?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
It confirmed in me something that, one of the joys I have about this thing is I didn't design this model. I just uncovered it. I spent time as a serial entrepreneur and just wrote down what I saw happening over and over again. It's a natural organic model. So I find out stuff that's new all the time myself. And you and I were at an event a while back, and Scotty Richheimer, who's the CEO of Skill Architects, helped me see something I'd never seen before, and you've just echoed it, that one of the things I believe that in your practice, having predictable success, that you're now able to help people with, that really no one else does with any, there are lots of great growth models out there. We help people with the when.
Yes.
It's not just the what. It's not just, okay, you need to do this. Yeah, but when? What's the sequence? There's like 50 things I need to do. So what's the chronology of this? And that's the bit that I've been rolling around in a little bit since Scotty shared that, and it's so very, very true. And it helps a lot with consulting gigs, because you then know how to set out the stepping stones of implementing. You're not just throwing a bunch of stuff and saying, throw it against the wall, see what sticks.
Yeah, I think that it's funny, when Scott did give us that perspective on, the when piece of this, it was like, that was a light bulb for me. I had one of my team members years ago, she would just call me sequencer, because she was like, you're always trying to do things in the right order to help us achieve what we need. And I was like, I just can't not, because there's a part of me, I'm just hyper efficient. So I'm always looking at what's the most efficient way to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so I resonated really deeply with that when Scotty brought that perspective to it, because it's like, yeah, it's so much about the when. And I think, again, what I find so powerful when I introduce clients to predictable success is the wow, okay, there is a roadmap. There is a way to address the things that I'm feeling or sensing. And just the hopefulness that creates, it's is there a webcam in our office? Because how do you know exactly it's because it's predictable. Like every organization is going to experience this at these different stages. And so and I think what I hear so much from clients is, so I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy. This isn't just me. Like, I'm not, and I think that's where my compassion for senior leaders, founding leaders comes in, is that, they get so frustrated and discouraged when they just feel stuck because they don't know what to do when. And again, the model's just so powerful for that.
Well, just stick with chronology for a moment or two. As I say, we bring you back 5 years from now. You tell us everything that's wonderful has happened with Foresight. What are your dreams, hopes, visions for your business moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes I get a little stuck on that, in that I want to do everything. So I have a little.
Seriously? You?
Right? Can you believe that at all? I was like, I want to do it all. And I'll never forget this. I was doing a strategy session with one of my team members, and this was probably 2 or 3 years ago now. This is so typical founders like curse, right? But we're whiteboarding out like all these things. And she said, Jen, those aren't just like 20 ideas. Those are like 20 different businesses. And I was like, okay, time out. So here is I am loving continuing to I love straddling both the corporate and the faith-based nonprofit areas. I do love, and there's some of that I'm like, should I pick a lane? But I find that I love serving both. And so I think I'd love to see that continue to expand. I really have a deep passion and heart for organizational culture. And I know that is, it's a hot topic kind of everywhere, but I think it's a really key topic, especially with all of the upheaval we're seeing in staffing dynamics and, the war on talent and, the great resignation and people really rethinking, why do I do what I do? And I think it just puts more onus on leaders to create cultures where people are engaged and thriving. And I think I would love for foresight, and I would love to continue to be a thought leader in that space, helping organizations think really intentionally and deliberately about that. So I think that would be success for me in another 5 years is we've continued to help influence and shape the health of organizations and their teams.
Right.
And that I've got a great team of people working alongside me to do that, so we can just serve more leaders better.
Right. And folks that have been listening here, if they think they want to talk to you a little bit more, let's do the usual stuff. Tell everybody where they can go find out more about you.
Yeah, our website is getforesight.com. So it's the word get, G-E-T, the number 4, and the word sight, S-I-G-H-T, getforesight.com. You can find all kinds of information, great resources, blogs, podcasts, the whole thing there. And then I'm just at Jenni Catron on all social media accounts, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever social media account you're on. I mean, I am there as at Jenni Catron, and I love to connect that way.
And just to be clear for everybody, that's Jenni with 2 N's and Catron is C-A-T-R-O-N, Jenni Catron.
That's correct.
Well, Jenni, it's been an absolute, genuine delight and pleasure to have you come into, first of all, the Predictable Success ecosystem, and then to get to know you personally, and a great admiration and respect for what you do. It's been a delight to have you here. And we'll get you back in 5 years and we'll find out which of those 20 businesses you launched.
That's perfect. Les, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your voice and influence and the opportunity to keep learning from you. So thanks for this opportunity as well.
Thanks, Jenni.